You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are recording right before we get to go to Savannah Crime Expo. And we are psyched, aren't we, Bill Thomas?
We are. I'm hard-pressed to figure out how that all happened so quickly, but here it is, September, and Savannah Crime Expo is upon us.
We are really looking forward to this opportunity to hang out with some of the top forensic minds. Dr. Henry Lee is going to be there. You've met him, though, I think. I have not.
I have. I've even had my picture taken with him, and he's a lovely guy.
Yeah, I have not had a chance to meet him. I am looking forward to it. So there's going to be all sorts of excellent forensic guests there and a lot of our fellow colleagues in true crime podcasting. So I think it's going to be a great time. And I get to see Savannah for the first time, which I have never seen.
I have been to Savannah once, and it is quite beautiful. Hopefully we'll have a little downtime. So tell the folks about Savannah Crime Expo.
So Savannah Crime Expo is in Savannah, and it is going to be an absolutely wonderful time. It is a one-day expo, so this is not like CrimeCon, unfortunately, but it is one full day of different panels about the forensic aspects of true crime specifically. So it is going to be one excellent event after another during the day. And as soon as we heard about Savannah Crime Expo, I know I immediately jumped on you and was like, we gotta go.
Yes, we do. And all of this is happening Saturday, September 25th in Savannah, Georgia. And it's going to be fantastic. So if you're in the area or in the region, head there now.
Yes, definitely check SavannahCrimeExpo.com to see if there are still tickets available. We're going to be there. Our good friend Mac is going to be there. Dr. Henry Lee is going to be there. It's going to be great fun.
Dr. Laura Petler, Cheryl McCollum, and many other podcasters are going to be there as well. So it's a very interesting group of investigators, scientists, forensic experts. It's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We are looking forward to that. And so the week that this airs, we will be headed to Savannah on Friday. I'm taking 2 days off school so that I can drive down on one and drive back up the other and spend some time in Savannah with my partner in true crime.
That's true. Savannah Crime Expo, Saturday, September 25th. Be there or be squared.
And if you are there, take a look for us. We do have a booth. We're going to have merch and a great big banner and all sorts of wonderful stuff. So you'll be able to find us. Just look for us.
Absolutely. And we've gotten some nice notes from other true crime podcasters and other folks saying, oh, I'm so looking forward to meeting you guys and that kind of thing, which is really nice. We look forward to hopefully seeing some of you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So come have a selfie or something with us. I hate selfies, but I'll do it for my fans. My fans ask for it and I will do it.
Why not?
Why not? We do want to continue to give a shout out to our friends at TeePublic who continue to have sales on a fairly regular basis so that all of you fine people who have not yet bought your Mind Over Murder merchandise, you can buy it and at a discounted price.
Yeah, it seems to happen pretty regularly, and we love that about TeePublic. So t-shirts, mugs, stickers, hoodies,
tote bags,
onesies for the little kids and really little kids. Phone protector holder thingies.
Phone cases.
Yeah, they've got all kinds of stuff. They've got notebooks. You name it, they've got it with the Mind Over Murder logo. And we have two different ways for you to have these items imprinted. Of course, you get to pick the color and the size and the style. They have styles for women, men, soft cotton, stiff cotton, you name it. Lightweight, heavyweight. Like I like a heavyweight t-shirt. Pamela, my partner, she likes the lightweight t-shirts. It's all about your personal preference. So you can spec your items your way. And then you have two different logos to choose from. One says Mind Over Murder with our thumbprint logo. And then the other one says Mind Over Murder. And then at the top and the bottom, we added True Crime Podcast. So that way you don't have to answer that question, what's Mind Over Murder all about? Then it gets started with, oh, I see it's a true crime podcast. Tell me more. And then you can tell your friends or whoever's staring at you at the grocery store what exactly is going on with your hoodie, sweatshirt, t-shirt, or what have you.
It sounds really excellent. And you can get any type of t-shirt you want. I just ordered one that is red with our cool Mind Over Murder red logo.
That's a bold fashion choice.
Yeah. I have one in light blue and I have one in black. And so now I figure let's just go ahead and try bright red.
Wow. You're much more fashion forward than I am. I
don't know about that.
White and light gray, gym shirt.
Yeah.
Light gray. I will say this, and everyone remember this, be you single or coupled up, wearing Mind Over Murder merchandise is a great way to meet interesting people in the produce section at the grocery store.
That is probably true.
And if you happen to be in a committed relationship like I am, you can smile and chat with them. They might even be able to tell you're smiling even through your mask. And by the way, we do have Mind Over Murder masks.
Yes.
I don't have one of those yet.
No, I don't have one either, but I think I'm going to order one, but probably not to wear when I'm at school because I don't want people to be like, why are you doing podcast merchandise in school?
Why are you promoting your podcast while teaching America's youth?
Yeah.
But
they frown upon that.
I think I might want to get a Mind Over Murder mask, you know?
Yeah, me too. We'll see if we can get it here in time for Savannah Crime Expo.
Why not?
Why not?
Thank you all very much for your ongoing support. And perhaps we should get into our discussion, a continued discussion from last week.
We are picking up with our discussion about Patricia Cornwell's novel, All That Remains, which does seem to be based on the Colonial Parkway Murders. We started last week doing a comparative analysis. My AP students would know that it is called a rhetorical analysis.
Oh.
If they're listening and they're understanding what I'm saying, and I don't know that's the truth.
Is this the part when I go harumph and say, seems to be based on the Colonial Parkway Murders?
I'm going to stick with seems to be based on the Colonial Parkway Murders.
Thank you, counselor, for keeping us out of jail or something.
Yeah, you guys will note that we are trying very hard not to incur the wrath of anybody with way more money than we have. So everything seems to be or could be or is possibly based on, but we're not sure.
Okay. So tell us more, Kristin Dilley.
We had left off and we both rolled our eyes at each other and says, oh my gosh, we're only on chapter 5 when there's 14 chapters.
It's good stuff though. So stay with us.
I think it is. Last time when we left off, we did talk about the first 4 chapters of the novel and the striking resemblances between the fictional murders of Deborah Harvey and Fred Chaney and the actual murders of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. Chapter 5, I think, is one of the more interesting ones in the book because it does go into I'm not going to say alarming amount of detail, but a lot of detail that is very reminiscent of photos from the Phelps-Lauer crime scene that both of us have seen.
Yeah, I would say that's quite true.
So for chapter 5, Kay and Pete Marino do get called into the woods to respond to the call to recover the bodies of Deborah Harvey and Fred Chaney. And I think some of her best narrative powers here are on display because she goes into quite a lot of detail about this particular crime scene. It matches up, as I said earlier, I think pretty well with the photos that we have seen from the Phelps-Lauer crime scene, even right down to the descriptions of investigators in foul weather gear and wearing boots, tromping the woods in the middle of a rainy afternoon.
And I know most folks have not seen the crime scene photos, thankfully, although some of the crime scene photos actually have appeared in public. Kristin, you actually put up a photograph from the crime scene, which shows them, the real life investigators, and Marcella Fierro, the chief medical examiner for the Commonwealth of Virginia, upon whom the Kay Scarpetta character is based. They show them really out in the woods wearing their foul weather gear. And so the descriptions from the book are extremely close to reality.
We have the bodies were lying next to each other face down in a small clearing about a quarter of a mile from the muddy logging road where we left our cars. They were so badly decomposed they were partially skeletonized. The long bones of arms and legs protruded like dirty gray sticks from rotted clothing scattered with leaves. Skulls were detached and had been nudged or rolled, probably by small predators a foot or two away. It is easy to read that description and imagine corresponding crime scene photos if you have seen them, or if you have watched episode 4 of the Lover's Lane murders, which does cover the Phelps Lauer case and which does, unfortunately, include some of those crime scene photos. She does include some details that are true only to the murders in the book, not to actual real life. She describes both bodies as having neither shoes nor socks on. That is not true to the best of our knowledge. And Deborah Harvey is shown having a purse with her at the scene. Again, to the best of our knowledge, that is not true of the Phelps Lauer crime scene. Anna Maria did have 2 purses with her, and neither of them were found with her remains or were recovered with her body. Scarpetta does go into cause of death, at least as far as she is able to. She says, as for what happened to the couple, I could not tell. There were no ligatures indicating strangulation. I saw no obvious fractures or holes that might have meant blows or bullets. Male and female were quietly together in death. The bones of her left arm slipped under his right as she'd been holding on to him at the end, empty eye sockets gaping as rain moved over their skulls. Again, very evocative photo there. You can picture it. I can almost match it up with some of the crime scene photos. We never do have a conclusive cause of death for Daniel and Anna Maria. It was determined that Anna Maria was stabbed because there was a slice mark on the bone in her hand. And they do go a little bit more into depth on that later in the book when Scarpetta has to take the bones from Deborah Harvey to the Smithsonian Institute. But we do not have an actual cause of death for either Anna Maria or Daniel. It is just listed as homicide.
This Smithsonian detail, though, is exactly what happened in real life. So here again, we have this very strong parallel between what is supposed to be a work of fiction and what we know to be the real story of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer's death. We don't know everything, but for instance, it's very striking that the Smithsonian is utilized to analyze the bones and that a nick mark is found on the fictional character Deborah Harvey's left index finger, which lines up pretty closely with our real life experience in the Phelps Lauer murder.
Absolutely. And we did find out through some reporting that the doctor at the Smithsonian who did examine Anna Maria Phelps's finger bone was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Douglas Ubelaker. And he did determine that there was a knife slice to her finger. For chapter 6, there is more about that Smithsonian detail, and you get a sense of where the story is going to go in terms of resolution when they start delving into potential theories. Last episode, we covered some of the different theories that have come up about this case, some of which are true only to the world of the book and some of which are true in real life. Cornwell does create a detail that exists only in fiction. We have absolutely no indication that this particular detail that we're about to talk about exists in real life, but she does create a calling card that is left by the killer at each of the couple's crime scenes. That is a Jack of Hearts playing card left on each of the bodies at each of the crime scenes. To the best of our knowledge, and Bill, please correct me if I'm wrong, there is nothing even remotely similar to that in real life, correct?
No, I don't think so. Certainly never heard about it.
So you do get some political conspiracy type storylines in chapter 6 that deals with potential political motives for murdering Deborah Harvey as a retaliation for the work that her mother is doing as the drug czar. But there was a line that I particularly connected with in chapter 6. It's just a feeling that I sometimes get when I'm feeling paranoid about this case and its chances of being solved. And it is a line that comes from Abby Turnbull. And I'll be interested to know if you ever feel this way about it, Bill. Abby's line is, I swear to God, case, something is being covered up. Something the FBI, the government doesn't want the public to ever find out. You mark my words, even if these killings stop, these cases will never be solved if the FBI has their way about it.
It's an interesting observation. On my darkest days, I can understand what this fictional character, Abby, is talking about. I had some conversations with a well-informed colleague who has been working with us on the Colonial Parkway murders for decades recently, and I asked her if the FBI would ever fail to solve the Colonial Parkway murders because of their embarrassment about the Colonial Parkway murders. And sadly, she said yes. And where the two of us were going in this conversation was the following. Any fair tell of the Colonial Parkway murders story to date results in a significant amount of embarrassment to the FBI. The FBI has not solved this case, which will now stretch into 35 years this October. That will be the 35th anniversary of the first murder in the Colonial Parkway murders, that of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. And then further, they seem to have dropped the ball investigatively any number of times, as well as failing to follow up on leads. Right now, we are waiting for test results from forensic evidence that was sent to the Quantico lab 1 year ago. That's how slow and what a low priority the Colonial Parkway murders in real life are turning into. Further, there's no way around this. There are all of these problems, clear problems in the Colonial Parkway murders. The lack of coordination with local law enforcement, the obvious friction between departments, the way that other investigative agencies have told us on and off the record that they were frozen out of the Colonial Parkway murders. The FBI took the attitude, we're the FBI, you guys butt out. And so agencies that could have been helpful to the FBI were pushed aside by investigators from the Bureau. And then we have the situation with the leaked crime scene photos. In 2009, that story broke about the FBI losing control of 78 highly graphic crime scene photos and failing to follow up and collect those crime scene photos. Those photos are out in the public now. Obviously, not every person that listens to this podcast around the world can see those photographs, but they're out there. Some of them are on the World Wide Web, and some of them, if you know where to look, are to be found. And it's very disturbing to me as the brother of a murder victim that this has happened. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we also have the embarrassment of Kathy and Becky's rape kits being thrown away and burned as medical waste 8 years after the fact. And Marcella Fierro, again, the real-life Kay Scarpetta, the chief medical examiner for the Commonwealth of Virginia, said to me, Mr. Thomas, you never throw away evidence in an unsolved murder case. The FBI had Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski's rape kits burned as medical waste 8 years after their murders. This is unacceptable. So what you can see is problem after problem in the Colonial Parkway murders investigation. What I find very painful, and I struggle with this, is would the FBI fail to put resources into the Colonial Parkway murders investigation at this point because it's politically embarrassing to the FBI? I want to be proven wrong, but the only way I'm going to be proven wrong is if the FBI continues to put resources into this case. And let me tell you something, waiting a year, literally a year, for forensic results, and now the FBI has sent in additional evidence for testing. Is that going to take a year as well? They are moving at glacial speed in terms of this investigation. And it really upset me several months ago for this longtime colleague to tell me that she's concerned that the FBI might not solve the Colonial Parkway murders because the Colonial Parkway murders are embarrassing for the Bureau. That is unacceptable to me.
Agreed, 100%. When I read that quote from the Abby Turnbull character, I definitely marked it in my copy of the book, and I made sure to send it to you because there are times when I'm not a family member, but I have worked on this case for a while now, or 7 years, I think. If I feel this way at times, I can't imagine what you all go through on a daily basis, dealing with, for your family and Becky's, it is 35 years this year. Can't even imagine it. As soon as I saw that, I was like, let me send that to Bill and see what Bill thinks.
I talked at length with another family member from one of the other Colonial Parkway murders earlier today. And without getting into specifics, we talked twice at length today. And I'm not speaking for her, but I think she feels the same way. Yeah. She is fed up and disgusted with the foot dragging and the endless excuses and the fact that there's always a new case, which we understand. To be handed 35 years worth of excuses as to why our case is always the lowest possible priority at the FBI. It's infuriating, it's insulting, it's unacceptable.
And the delays in the forensics lab are ridiculous too, especially when you consider that the FBI has long said that Quantico is the top state-of-the-art forensics lab. Are you sure? Why do you need a year to test a piece of evidence then?
I will maintain that the Quantico lab, in my opinion, is grossly overworked and understaffed.
Probably, yeah.
If something, I understand that an urgent case where lives are at stake is going to take precedence over the Colonial Parkway murders. Our case is 31 to 34 years old. I get it. I haven't lost my perspective completely. But the idea that a low priority case like ours would take a year to get test results, I'm sorry, that's insane. I could see a month or two, maybe 3, with everything else that's going on. I understand that. I'm not expecting that a 30-plus-year-old murder case, however heinous, is going to be the top priority for FBI Quantico. But a year? And every single time before that, it was always at least 6 months, if not long. And I've been reminded so many times I can't even count anymore by FBI agents saying, this is a cold case. And it's like, yeah, I know it's a cold case. You don't need to remind me every single time. How does a case grow cold? It grows cold because it's not being given any kind of priority treatment. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
One of the things that I like most about the next chapter of the book is that it does give us an opportunity to talk about something that you and I have had a number of questions about prior to this, but that we haven't really gone into detail about, and that is the use of psychics in the Colonial Parkway investigation. And we have had people both ask if that has been done, and we have, within recent memory, had people offer to provide their services in this way. So in chapter 7 of All That Remains, you do have Scarpetta and Marino visiting a woman named Hilda Ozimek, described as a psychic who has worked with the FBI before and who lives in South Carolina. As soon as I read that name, I thought, I wonder if they mean Dorothy Allison, because Dorothy Allison was a New Jersey psychic. She was a housewife who just happened to have this particular rare gift, who did help law enforcement on kidnapping and missing persons cases. In fact, she was consulted on some of the really big cases. She was consulted on Patty Hearst on the Atlanta child murders. I know I'm missing a couple of big ones, but Dorothy Allison was actually a psychic that the FBI was willing to approach and to take her help. And so I thought it was very interesting that when she mentioned the Hilda Ozimek character, I immediately went to, is this Dorothy Allison?
Dorothy Allison in real life was not without controversy. Some people were very critical of her. They felt that she tended to focus on the highest profile cases and really put herself out there in a way as to increase her visibility. Interestingly, for the most part, except for paying her expenses, which were pretty limited, you watched the budget very carefully, she didn't accept fees for her work. She did ask that they cover her travel expenses. She did do work on some very prominent cases. And I know that York-Poquoson County now Major Ron Montgomery worked with Dorothy Allison, and she did consult on the Colonial Parkway murders. I don't know a lot about what she said to the law enforcement investigators who worked this case, but we're actually going to try to circle back. Dorothy herself has passed away. Some of the family members and some of the longtime investigators remember when she consulted on the case. We're going to try to see if we can find out more about this, but the Hilda Ozimek character in All That Remains appears to be based on the real-life Dorothy Allison, who did actually consult on the Colonial Parkway murders.
And I did do some digging for, I don't know if I've mentioned it before, what my case book actually looks like, but I do have a pretty large book of articles and reporting on this case that I keep in chronological order in my room. And as soon as I heard Dorothy Allison, I was like, I think I have an article about her. Let me check. I went digging through my files.
And you did.
And I did. There is some reporting from the Daily Press from June of 1988. And Ron Montgomery is quoted as saying that he said, there are very few leads in this case. I don't think I will ever reveal what Dorothy has told me, which of course made me immediately go, ooh, what did she tell you? What'd she tell you? Major Montgomery, what'd she tell you?
He may or may not tell us. We are in touch, Major Montgomery, and we can ask the question. He doesn't have to answer it.
He did say that he is impressed with her abilities and is willing to accept help from any place it comes from. So people have asked us before, have you considered a psychic? So yes, a psychic has been considered and consulted. As to more than that, have we had more than one psychic on the case?
I believe so, actually. There was a television series, and again, we are going back, but there was a television series called Sensing Murder. And
I think that may have been Dorothy Allison's. I'm not sure.
And there was another psychic who was also consulted. I think it may be Dorothy Allison and another woman. I think both of them were consulted on the case. It's been a long time since that television show aired. And of course, some of these independent television shows are hard to find. And I'm not certain I've laid eyes on that Sensing Murder episode since it ran many years ago.
Now I'm hoping, though, that someone who's listening can dig that up somehow or another.
Maybe somebody recorded it, probably on VHS or beta.
Yeah. I think there's another one, Real Stories of the Highway Patrol did a piece on the Colonial Parkway Murders, and I haven't been able to lay my eyes on that one either. So if anybody happens to have that one.
I saw it when it aired, and I don't think I've seen it since. Oh, speaking of television, the Lover's Lane Murders television series is now appearing in more territories around the world. And we got a very nice email, which we haven't even had time to respond to yet, from a listener to this podcast who is in Australia, who's now just seen the television series, and that precipitated a bunch of questions, really good questions, which is why we haven't answered your email yet. And we do apologize. But for our international listeners, check now, because sometimes television series that appears in one territory, some 6-7 months later, and that we're right about at that time now, will start to appear in other territories. There was an Australian series that some friends of mine consulted on about the Ivan Milat case, which is a series of unsolved homicides down in Australia. And interestingly, that series has just shown up on A&E here in the United States. So I'll be making some time to watch this Ivan Milat. It's like a 3 or 4 part series on this unsolved Australian case. And now our Australian and New Zealand fans can see the Lover's Lane Murders television series on the Colonial Parkway Murders, hence our inquiries from our friends down under.
And by the way, if for people who are seeing this for the first time, please do send us in your questions. Just because we've talked about the Lover's Lane Murders before, we are still happy to talk about it again and again.
And people always have great questions, and their perspective is obviously going to be very fresh. And they would have just seen the series, and we promise we'll be good about answering and replying to questions.
For the next couple chapters of All That Remains, you get a lot more of the political conspiracy, government-sponsored murder subplot. A lot of the suppositions there continue to move forward through chapters 8 and 9, and nothing closely resembles real life or the case itself happens through those chapters. What is of note is chapter 10, where you get a return to the theory about the rogue CIA agent from Camp Perry that's stalking and murdering people.
I will add something here, though. Patricia Cornwell does a lot of research for her books, and she's got fantastic real-world connections to government agencies. For example, it's often mentioned that she has access at the highest level in various aspects of the government. And so, for example, things that the average person wouldn't have access to, like special training at FBI Quantico and direct access to key players within government agencies. There is something interesting that she outlines here, which are the maneuvers and what would you call them, like exercises?
Training exercises, yeah.
Tell us about what Cornwell puts out here about the agents in training at CIA Camp Perry leaving and practicing some of the skills in public. What is it she says they do?
She says, I'm sure it comes as no surprise that the CIA is privy to most of what goes on around their training facility. They know a lot more than anyone might imagine. And in fact, local settings and citizens are routinely incorporated into maneuvers. Surveillance, for example. Officers in training at Camp Perry often practice surveillance using local citizens as guinea pigs, for lack of a better term. Officers set up surveillance operations in public places, restaurants, bars, shopping centers. They tail people in cars, on foot, take photographs, and so on. No one is ever aware this is going on, of course, and there's no harm done, except the local citizens wouldn't be keen on knowing they're being tailed, watched, or captured on film. And as someone who lives near Camp Perry, yikes.
And for those of you who don't live nearby, Camp Perry is right there on the Colonial Parkway, a couple of miles away from the location where we believe some of the Colonial Parkway murders took place.
Growing up in this area, Camp Perry has always been like the worst kept secret, because anybody who lives here and who works in the military or just has lived here long enough, we know about Camp Perry. We know it's there. They're not trying to hide it. They're not saying, don't look over here and you won't see a secret government military base. But it is, and it's not a secret that it's the CIA's main training facility either. But it is very much like a place that is shrouded in mystery. You can drive along on my 35-minute commute home from my job. When I don't take the Parkway, I do take Interstate 64, and that runs along the border of Camp Perry. And you can see the chain link fence separating 64 from Camp Perry. You can see all of the patrol cars, the Jeeps that Perry uses that say base police or base patrol on them. It's pretty common over in my neck of the woods, and I think in a lot of other people's too, especially those along the Parkway, to hear when they're doing heavy ordnance practice. You can be sitting outside on the porch on a Saturday. It's nice and sunny. You're reading a book and you're hearing explosions. And so that's Camp Perry. They're at Camp Perry. They're just doing stuff over there. I don't know what they're doing. They're blowing a lot of stuff up. I'm hoping they're practicing for World War III or something like that over there. It's not a secret, but it's a little alarming to hear that they may actually be out doing maneuvers. I don't like that.
And helicopters fly in and out of Camp Perry regularly. They also have a full-size airport, so heavy aircraft can fly in and out of Camp Perry undetected, and often do. The comings and goings and the activity behind the fence at Camp Perry are off limits to the public. There have been rumors for years. We're not buying into the rogue CIA theory. And I actually think that Patricia Cornwell may be responsible for the promotion of that theory, that somehow this rogue CIA agent is responsible for the Colonial Parkway murders. This idea that agents in training leave the base and go out and practice some of the techniques, following people, surreptitiously taking pictures and that sort of thing. Over the years, I've heard that they would go to shopping centers and malls, and they would go to Colonial Williamsburg and downtown Williamsburg and places like that and try these techniques out. They don't harm the public or interact with the public really in any kind of direct way, as far as we know. They are supposedly out trying out their techniques.
And if that is the case, which we have no reason to doubt, it is really just only one step beyond that to this terrifying idea that what if somebody's out there practicing killing people? That's a place you don't want your mind to go. But I would say that any person in Williamsburg who has ever thought or expounded upon the theory, what if it's a rogue Camp Perry agent? I think it's pretty safe to say they probably got that idea from this book.
I would agree.
And it is a really compelling story. It truly is. I hope that it is not true. I 100% hope that it is not true.
So how else does the book parallel real?
In chapter 11, we do end up meeting a set of characters who are pretty similar to Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. In chapter 11, as Scarpetta and Marino are following this trail of hydroshock bullets that were pulled out of Deborah Harvey, they find out that there was a couple named Jill Harrington and Elizabeth Mott who were murdered in Williamsburg 8 years prior to the events of the book in a manner that makes Kay Scarpetta very suspicious. The characters of Jill Harrington and Elizabeth Mott are, again, they are similar enough to make you go, but they are also, they're not carbon copies. Their crime scene is very different from Kathy and Becky's crime scene. They're found shot to death in a cemetery on a Friday night in September. as opposed to the circumstances of Kathy and Becky's death, which was being found in the trunk of Kathy's car on the Parkway in October. But there are some similarities in terms of cause of death. Both had knife injuries. They were both bound at the wrists, and they both disappeared after being seen at a bar called the Anchor Bar and Grill in Williamsburg, which sounds pretty similar to me to the Yorktown pub, which is where there were unconfirmed reports putting Kathy and Becky before their murder. You also have the description of both women as being fit and athletic, which we know does apply both to Kathy and Becky. There is only one odd clue that appears just in the book, as opposed to anything that parallels real life. But that is that at the crime scene, there is a copious amount of blood in the backseat of the victim's car. And while there was blood in Kathy's car, it was not enough blood to indicate that either woman was killed in the car or that their assailant had injured themselves in the commission of the crime. The characters of Jill Harrington and Elizabeth Mott are definitely enough to give you pause. Bill, since you are Kathy's brother, what were your thoughts when you first read about this lesbian couple?
There are some additional striking similarities. The Jill Harrington character is described as having defensive cuts to both forearms and hands, contusions and lacerations on her face. Apparently, she had put up one hell of a struggle, ending up with her being stabbed 11 times, quoting from the book, page 240. The stabbed 11 times part is not accurate, but those other descriptors are very close to how Kath was found. It does appear that Kathy Thomas struggled with their attacker and ended up with a significant amount of violence aimed at her, perhaps as a result of her standing up for them. Although Becky in real life did not suffer as many wounds that would probably originate from a struggle or a fight, this description of the Jill and Elizabeth characters does sound like Kathy and Becky's autopsies and descriptions of how they were found and the amount of violence directed at Kathy in particular. It really does sound similar.
And in the next chapter, we do get some more details about the women. And again, they do not track 100% with Kathy and Becky, but they do have some similarity. Elizabeth was working in sales for a local computer company and doing extremely well. Jill had just finished law school at William & Mary and had gone to work for a small firm in Williamsburg.
Again, there's some pretty strong parallels. Kathy was working, she'd left the Navy a few months prior. She was working as a stockbroker for a stock brokerage in Virginia Beach. And Becky in real life was just wrapping up her senior year at William & Mary. So there's still some very strong parallels here. It almost reads like this is the Colonial Parkway Murders with a few tweaks to the details, just enough to shift it from the realm of nonfiction to fiction.
There was a speech that Abby Turnbull gives. The character has dealt with the loss of her sister to murder several years previous. And so she makes this speech about living with the murder of her sister, which I think is designed to give the perspective of families of murder victims. And of course, when I read something like that, my first immediate thought is whether or not that does ring true for you and the other families. So she says, when you're going through something like this, you don't know what you're doing, even if you think you do. And no one can really understand what it's like unless they've suffered the same thing. You feel isolated. You go places and people avoid you, are afraid to meet your eyes and make conversation because they don't know what to say. You feel as if you're living inside a cave. You're afraid to be alone, afraid to be with others, afraid to be awake, afraid to go to sleep because of how awful it feels when morning comes. You run like hell and you wear yourself out. As I look back, I can see that everything since Hannah died was half crazy. Do you feel like she's hit the nail on the head there, or only some of it?
I do. For years, I divided the world up into two categories. Those that knew Kathy and knew about our loss, and everyone else. So that first group, the people that knew Kathy and knew my family and therefore had known that Kathy and Becky had been murdered, that became a finite group of people. And then there was everyone else. For most of that time, I did not talk about Kathy's murder. And that may be hard to believe now because I talk about it a lot. But for years, the whole topic of Kathy and Becky's murder felt like the ultimate conversation stopper. If it came up in conversation with people that didn't know Kathy and didn't know my family and didn't know the story, it always felt like it brought the conversation to a screeching halt. Yeah. And then people would ask questions. They weren't being insensitive. I don't think they were being rude, but it was really difficult then to move on from that subject. So picture yourself at a dinner party, and this is me now. I'd be at a dinner party or a gathering or whatever, and if it came up, I'd wince inside because I would know that the next 15 minutes, if we were lucky, or 3 hours if we weren't, was going to end up being consumed by this conversation. Just seemed to bring everything to a screeching halt while we talked about this horrible thing that had happened. So a lot of times I would deflect. If it came up, how many kids were in my family, I would say 3, which is not true. It's 4. Kathy is the youngest of 4. Or I wasn't completely comfortable with that. I would say 4. But then if people said, oh, I know your brother. I know you both your brothers. Do you have another brother? Do you have another sister? I didn't want to deny her existence, but sometimes I would often say she died in an accident, or that's a conversation for another. And most people are smart enough to figure out that you really don't want to talk about it.
Sure.
Or sometimes I just smile and say, I don't really want to talk about it. And again, most people are sensitive enough to realize I'm a grown man, but I clearly don't want to talk about this right now because it seemed to completely suck the oxygen out of the room every single time it came up. So until I got heavily involved in the case in 2009, so for 23 years, I didn't really talk about it, except with someone that knew Kathy from before. And they might say, how are you doing? How are your parents? That kind of thing. How are your brothers doing? And they didn't just mean, how's their health? They meant, how are they coping? And then a lot of friends of mine who worked with me over the years in the music business and the entertainment business that knew me during those 23 years after Kathy died, but before I got more heavily involved in the case in 2009, I can't count how many people, hundreds of people have said to me, I never knew this because I never talked about it. So I get what the fictional character of Abby is talking about. They're afraid to meet your eyes and make conversation because they don't know what to say. And I didn't want to be the person that people avoided. I have had some friends, though, over the years that just could not deal, which made me very sad. One of my college roommates, I remember a few years after Kathy died, we hadn't talked in a while, and he called to check in, and he knew my family and everything, and he didn't know about Kathy's death. And we were talking, and I got to Kathy, and I told him what had happened, and he just couldn't deal. Wow. And that's actually the last time I ever spoke to him. And I really like this guy.
Wow.
I'd love to reconnect with him someday. I don't know. He clearly felt terrible, and he felt awkward, I think. It was over the phone, but we never spoke again. And all these years later, I've still never spoken to him. And I'm not mad at him or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I still consider him a good friend. And we were roommates senior year in college. And he's a fantastic person. I would love to reconnect with him. But it ended on that really awkward note. So that feeling like you can't bring this subject up without it sucking all the oxygen out of the room, I totally get where Abby is coming from. My guess is, by the way, this is Cornwell's probably very well-researched conversation. This feels like she's talking to someone that's really suffered this kind of loss.
Yeah.
And this rings very true for me, especially the first year after Kathy died. I barely remember what went on. A lot of what this Abby character says feels pretty spot on for me.
Coming from someone who did have a friend who was murdered, it is weird trying to talk to the family of someone who has been murdered because you don't know what to say.
Right.
You're trying to tread on eggshells. What is okay for me to say? Can I memorialize this person by talking about them, or is it better not to? Can I mention the good, funny, interesting stories that I remember? Can I share photos? Or is it just better to tuck it away and not talk about it? It is really hard to know how to approach.
The only suggestion I would make is to ask your friend and say, how do they feel about this sort of thing? If it makes it worse for them, then perhaps you keep your conversation short. When people say there are no words, I think all you really have to say if someone hits you with something like this is, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary to draw a parallel between the losses in your life and these kind of profound losses, particularly, I think, for parents who've lost loved ones, which, as my mother said at the time, is out of the natural order of things. Funny, I was just reading over the weekend about siblings losing siblings like we've done, and the fact that seems to be an under-acknowledged, profound loss.
We're going to continue our analysis of Patricia Cornwell's All That Remains in our next episode. Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder, and we'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.